The entire military academy fell silent when Admiral Blackwood stood up and said these 5 words that changed everything. I trained her personally. But let me back up. Because what happened to my sister Valentina that day should never happen to any service member. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. I'm Devin, and Valentina is my older sister by 2 years. Growing up in our small Texas town of Cedar Ridge, she was the one who taught me how to throw a punch when Tommy Martinez kept stealing my lunch money in 5th grade. She was the one who stayed up all night helping me study for my SATs. Even though she had her own Navy entrance exams the next morning, she was the fearless one, the protector, the sister who always had my back no matter what. When Valentina told our family she wanted to become a Navy SEAL, Dad nearly choked on his coffee. This was 2015, and women had just been allowed into combat roles. Mom worried herself sick every single day during Valentina's training, but I knew she'd make it. I'd seen her run 5 miles every morning since she was 16. I'd watched her do push-ups until her arms gave out, then keep going anyway. I'd seen her study military tactics like other girls our age studied fashion magazines. The day she graduated from SEAL training was the proudest moment of our family's life. Dad, a retired Marine who'd served in Desert Storm, actually cried when they handed her those golden trident pins. "That's my daughter," he kept saying to anyone who would listen. "That's my little girl who just became one of the toughest warriors in the world." Valentina served 3 tours in Afghanistan. She came home with medals, commendations, and stories she couldn't tell us because they were classified. She also came home with nightmares and a scar across her left shoulder from shrapnel that nearly ended her career. But she was alive. She was decorated, and she was respected by every single person she'd served with. Which is why what happened at the Naval War College that day was so shocking. My sister had earned every honor, every recognition, every right to stand in front of those military leaders and share her expertise. She'd proven herself in ways most people never would have to. She'd bled for her country, saved lives, and developed innovative tactics that were already being implemented across special operations units. But none of that mattered to the man who stood up that day and called her a fraud. In 10 seconds, he tried to destroy everything she'd worked for, everything she'd sacrificed, everything she'd earned through years of the most grueling training and dangerous missions our military has to offer. That's when Admiral Blackwood stood up. That's when those 5 words changed everything. And that's when I learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign soil, but right here at home in rooms full of people who should know better. This is the story of how my sister Valentina went from being publicly humiliated and accused of stolen valor to receiving a standing ovation from 300 military officers. It's the story of courage, vindication, and what happens when someone finally stands up and says, "Enough is enough." 2 weeks before the presentation, Valentina got the call that would change everything. The Naval War College wanted her to speak about unconventional warfare tactics at their annual Strategic Leadership Conference. This wasn't just any speaking engagement. This was the military equivalent of being invited to give a TED Talk at Harvard. "Devin, they want me to present to over 300 high-ranking officers," she told me over the phone, her voice mixed with excitement and terror. Admirals, generals, foreign military attachés, people who make decisions that affect thousands of lives. Our whole family was buzzing with pride. Dad couldn't stop calling his buddies at the VFW. "My daughter Valentina, the Navy SEAL, is speaking at the War College," he'd announced to anyone within earshot at the local diner. Mom started planning what she'd wear to the presentation like it was Valentina's wedding day. But as the date approached, I noticed something troubling in my sister's voice during our nightly phone calls. The excitement was fading, replaced by a nervousness I hadn't heard since her SEAL training days. "What if they don't think I belong there?" she asked me 3 nights before the presentation. "What if they look at me and just see a woman pretending to be something she's not?" I reminded her of her service record. 3 deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart. Tactics she'd developed that were now being taught to incoming SEALs. Team members whose lives she'd saved who still called her on her birthday to thank her. "Val, you've earned every right to be in that room," I told her. "You're not pretending to be anything. You are a decorated Navy SEAL who has more combat experience than most of the people you'll be speaking to." The morning of her presentation, Valentina called me from the hotel. Her voice was steady, determined. "I'm ready, Devin. I've got my presentation memorized, my service records organized, and my dress blues pressed. This is my moment. She had no idea that in 3 hours someone would try to take that moment away from her. She had no idea that her entire military career would be called into question in front of the most influential military leaders in the country. Valentina walked into that auditorium like she owned it. Her dress blues were immaculate, every ribbon and medal positioned perfectly. She'd practiced her presentation dozens of times, covering innovative close-quarters combat techniques and intelligence-gathering methods she'd developed during her deployments. For the first 20 minutes, everything went flawlessly. She spoke with authority about urban warfare strategies, showing tactical diagrams and explaining how her team had successfully completed missions that others had deemed impossible. The audience was engaged, taking notes, nodding approvingly at her insights. Then came the question and answer session. Commander Rutherford stood up from the 5th row. I later learned he was 48 years old, a career officer who'd spent most of his 22 years behind a desk. He'd never deployed to a combat zone, never led troops into battle, never had to make life or death decisions under enemy fire. "Excuse me, Lieutenant Commander," his voice cut through the room like a blade. "I have serious concerns about the authenticity of these tactics you're presenting." Valentina paused, clearly caught off guard. "I'm sorry, sir. Could you clarify your concern? These are sophisticated operations you're describing. I've been in the Navy for over 2 decades, and frankly, I find it hard to believe that someone of your background developed these independently." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Other officers turned in their seats, sensing conflict. "Sir, I can provide detailed documentation of every operation I've referenced, including after-action reports and witness testimonies from my team members." Rutherford's voice grew louder, more aggressive. "Documentation can be falsified. What I'm questioning is whether you actually participated in these operations at the level you claim. This sounds suspiciously like stolen valor." The accusation hit the room like a bomb. Stolen valor was one of the most serious charges you could level against a service member. It meant claiming military honors and experiences you hadn't earned. Valentina's face flushed red, but her voice remained steady. "Commander, I assure you every detail of my service record is accurate and verifiable." "Then let's verify it," Rutherford declared. "I motion that this presentation be suspended until proper authentication can be provided." Whispers rippled through the audience. Some officers nodded in agreement. My decorated war hero sister was being publicly accused of being a fraud. The auditorium buzzed with uncomfortable whispers. I can only imagine what was going through Valentina's mind as she stood at that podium, facing down 300 pairs of eyes that suddenly seemed to doubt everything about her. But my sister didn't break. She didn't apologize or stammer excuses. Instead, she did something that shocked everyone in that room, including herself. She pulled out her phone. "You want verification, Commander Rutherford?" Valentina's voice carried a new edge, sharp and unwavering. "Then you'll get verification from the source." She dialed a number right there in front of everyone. The entire auditorium watched as she held the phone to her ear, waiting. The silence was deafening. "Admiral Blackwood? This is Lieutenant Commander Valentina Reeves. I'm currently at the Naval War College presenting to the Strategic Leadership Conference, and Commander Rutherford has publicly accused me of stolen valor and questioned my service record. I need you here immediately." The collective intake of breath from 300 military officers was audible. Admiral Patricia Blackwood wasn't just any flag officer. She was a living legend, the first woman to oversee special operations training, the architect of modern SEAL selection protocols. Officers who had never met her knew her reputation. Valentina listened for a moment, then responded, "Yes, ma'am, I understand. Thank you." She hung up and addressed the room with a composure that would have made our father proud. "Admiral Blackwood will be here in 30 minutes. She personally oversaw my training and can verify every operation I've referenced. Until she arrives, I'll continue my presentation. Anyone who has additional questions about my legitimacy can address them directly to her." Commander Rutherford shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Several officers around him suddenly found their notebooks very interesting to study. "Furthermore," Valentina continued, "I find it telling that my credentials are being questioned, not based on the content of my presentation, but on assumptions about what I look like or what someone believes I'm capable of. Admiral Blackwood will clarify any misconceptions." The next 28 minutes felt like the longest half hour in military conference history. Valentina finished her presentation with unwavering professionalism, while everyone waited for the reckoning that was about to walk through those doors. At exactly 2:47 p.m., the auditorium doors opened with a resounding thud. Admiral Patricia Blackwood strode in wearing her service dress blue uniform, her silver oak leaf clusters catching the overhead lights. Every person in that room shot to their feet like they'd been struck by lightning. She was smaller than I'd imagined from Valentina's descriptions, maybe 5'6", but she commanded the space like she was 10 feet tall. Her steel gray hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and her eyes swept across the room with the intensity of someone who'd spent decades making life-and-death decisions. At ease, she commanded, and 300 officers sat down in unison. Admiral Blackwood walked directly to the front of the room, her footsteps echoing in the absolute silence. She positioned herself next to Valentina at the podium and surveyed the audience with those penetrating eyes. "I understand. There are questions about Lieutenant Commander Reeves' service record." Her voice carried easily to the back row without amplification. Commander Rutherford stood up, his earlier bravado noticeably diminished. "Admiral, we simply wanted to verify the authenticity of the operations she described." Commander Rutherford, 22 years of service primarily in administrative roles, never deployed to a combat theater. "Is that assessment correct?" Rutherford's face went pale. "Yes, ma'am, but I believe my concerns were legitimate." Admiral Blackwood turned to face the entire audience. Lieutenant Commander Reeves completed Hell Week with the highest performance scores in her class. I personally oversaw her advanced tactical training. The operations she described today were conducted under my direct command during classified missions I cannot discuss in this setting. She paused, letting that sink in. The urban warfare tactics she presented were developed by her team during Operation Desert Hawk. Those innovations have since been integrated into standard SEAL training protocols. She saved 8 American lives during that deployment, including Major Harrison and Captain Torres, who are sitting in this audience today. 2 men in the third row stood up and saluted Valentina. "I trained her personally," Admiral Blackwood continued, "and I would trust her with my life. Anyone questioning her credentials is questioning mine. Are there any other concerns about Lieutenant Commander Reeves' authenticity?" The silence was deafening. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then something incredible happened. Major Harrison, one of the men Admiral Blackwood had mentioned, stood up and began clapping. Captain Torres joined him. Within seconds, the entire auditorium erupted in thunderous applause that lasted 4 full minutes. Commander Rutherford remained seated, his face crimson with embarrassment. When the applause finally died down, he slowly rose to his feet. "Lieutenant Commander Reeves," his voice was barely above a whisper, "I owe you a public apology. My assumptions were completely wrong, and my conduct was unprofessional." "I'm deeply sorry," Valentina nodded graciously. "Apology accepted, Commander. But this isn't really about me personally. This is about the dangerous precedent of questioning decorated service members based on preconceived notions rather than actual evidence." Admiral Blackwood stepped forward. "This incident highlights a critical flaw in our military culture. We cannot allow prejudice to undermine the credibility of those who have proven themselves in combat. Lieutenant Commander Reeves has earned every honor she's received through blood, sweat, and sacrifice." 6 months later, Valentina received a promotion to commander and was assigned to the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, training the next generation of SEALs. Commander Rutherford quietly requested a transfer to a logistics position on the West Coast. Admiral Blackwood ensured that this incident became part of mandatory unconscious bias training for all senior military leadership. But the most meaningful outcome came that evening. 3 young female midshipmen approached Valentina after her presentation. One of them, barely 19 years old, said, "Ma'am, watching you stand your ground today made me realize I want to try for SEAL training. If you can do it, maybe I can too." That's when Valentina knew the humiliation had been worth it. Sometimes the most important victories aren't about defending yourself, but about clearing the path for everyone who comes after you. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories of courage and resilience. These stories need to be told, and your support helps us share them with the world.